The woman changed into a sexy outfit, ready to enjoy a rare warm moment, but her husband pulled out a pair of handcuffs, locked her to the bed without a word, then swallowed a small blue pill, wanting to prove he was still strong in his old age. Unexpectedly, the drug triggered a heart attack and he collapsed right on top of his wife. The woman used every bit of strength to push her husband up with her feet, but he was already gone and his body rolled straight onto the floor. In panic, she hurriedly sat up and kept calling her husband's name, yet she never got any response. At that moment, her hands were firmly locked, and no matter how hard she pulled, she couldn't break free. In desperation, she wanted to call the police for help, but discovered her phone was far away on the table. She desperately tried to hook the phone with her foot, but it was always just a short distance short. Extreme helplessness gradually drove her into frenzy. She shouted for help as loud as she could, yet this area was very remote and the nearest neighbor was far away. As night fell, despair began to spread little by little. Then a noise came from outside the window, and a dark figure slowly approached the door. Overjoyed, the woman quickly cried for help, only to find that what had broken in was a wild dog that had smelled the blood on the floor. The wild dog slowly moved toward her husband's body. Jessie screamed in terror and frantically shook the bed frame, trying to drive the beast away, but the wild dog only backed up half a step and then began tearing at her husband's arm. Witnessing this scene with her own eyes, the woman's psychological defenses completely collapsed. She realized that if this continued, she herself would become food for the wild dog. Just as the woman sank into despair, her husband miraculously stood up. Jessie was thrilled and hurriedly begged her husband to unlock the handcuffs, but in an instant the illusion shattered. Her husband was clearly still lying on the floor. The helpless situation gradually pushed Jessie's mind to the brink of collapse. In a daze, two phantoms appeared in the room. One was her dead husband, constantly mocking her with harsh words, listing every repression and grievance in their marriage. The other was her clear-minded self, constantly urging her to calm down and find a way to stay alive. Jessie looked around and her eyes landed on those handcuffs. She used all her strength trying to break free, clenching her teeth against the pain from the friction. Luckily, her hands were small enough to slip out of the handcuffs. After freeing one hand, the other became much easier. She shook hard, broke the wooden post at the head of the bed, and in her mind appeared the image of herself successfully escaping and walking out the door with ease. But the illusion was ultimately false. When she came back to her senses, she was still firmly locked to the headboard. Now the room not only held her husband's phantom, but also another shadow of herself. The two illusions kept arguing, tearing open the secret past she had buried deep in her heart for decades. Only here do we understand the root of the female lead's personality. All the weakness of never daring to refuse and habitual obedience came from childhood trauma that never healed. When she was only 12 years old, on the afternoon she was watching eclipse, her father took advantage of the empty house and assaulted her. Afterward, he threatened and bribed her to keep this secret forever. The long-buried trauma quietly changed her character. She became used to suppressing her own feelings and always found it hard to firmly refuse unreasonable demands from others. The reason she reluctantly agreed to this absurd game in the first place also stemmed from that obedience carved deep in her heart. The sound of the wild dog gnawing continued by her ear, making her hair stand on end. A full 8 hours had already passed since the accident. Long periods without water or food left her both hungry and thirsty. She remembered her husband had placed a glass of water on the shelf before going to sleep, and a thread of hope lit up again. She moved the handcuffs step by step to the top, then used her left hand to push up the board so the glass of water above slowly slid toward her right hand, waiting until it reached the end to catch it with her right hand. But her husband's phantom mocked her childishness. She had thought a sip of water would ease state, but unexpectedly it was just a short distance short of reaching her mouth. With no other choice, she could only put the glass back. Then the instinct to survive quickly gave her an idea. The nightgown she was wearing had just been bought that day, and the price tag she had taken off during the day was still on the shelf. She reached out, took the tag down, and with difficulty rolled it into a straw with 2 fingers, then put it in her mouth and picked up the glass of water again. This time she finally drank the water of life. She greedily sucked several big mouthfuls, then put it back far away because she didn't know when she would be rescued. This limited water source was her hope of staying alive. The long tension finally eased, and exhausted in body and mind, she soon fell asleep. But the wild dog suddenly woke up, as if sensing danger approaching, and hurriedly fled the room. The woman also woke from her sleep. In the darkness, a black figure was slowly approaching her. Extreme fear instantly hit, yet after experiencing countless hallucinations she had already gone numb, certain this was another illusion produced by her mental collapse. Her chaotic thoughts were pulled back once more to that dark childhood memory. She returned again to the day of the eclipse, and only then suddenly understood what had truly locked her for a lifetime was never the iron handcuffs on the bed, but the invisible shackles of a childhood that no one saw and no one saved. She knew perfectly well that a light, casual apology could never make up for a childhood that had been completely crushed. Her father pretended to be gentle and loving, lightly stroking the unborn child in her mother's belly. That hypocritical face made her physically nauseous, and she crushed the glass in her hand. Seeing this, her father used the excuse of bandaging her wound to forcibly drag her back into the room, completely cutting off every possibility of her telling the truth and seeking redemption. Suddenly a wet, slippery feeling came from her toes. When she woke, she discovered it was the wild dog that had been lying in wait inside the house all along, and because her arm had been hanging for so long, her entire palm had become bruised. She hurriedly flailed about, moving her legs to promote blood circulation. At that moment Jessie was completely clear-headed and would no longer sit and wait for death. The next one to be chewed would definitely be herself. She looked at the glass of water by the bed and instantly had an idea for escape. Jessie picked up the glass, tearfully poured out the last bit of water, leaving herself no room for regret. Then she gripped the glass tightly and smashed it hard against the sharp corner of the partition. The glass was forced to crack, back. She grabbed the sharpest shard, wedged it into a crack in the wood, used the leverage while clenching her teeth with all her might, and without hesitation slid it across her own wrist. The moment blood gushed out, she clenched her teeth and forced harder, struggling desperately. Her skin was forcibly peeled back, and blood poured onto the floor like a faucet turned on. Finally, she succeeded. Jessie paid no attention to the pain, crawled under the bed, and used every bit of strength to push the bed aside so she could finally clamp the phone between her toes. Who knew that at that moment the phone was out of battery? With no other choice, she could only struggle to the other side and with difficulty pick up the handcuff key from the table. But her arm kept trembling from excessive blood loss, so she could only put the key in her mouth and finally managed to open the handcuffs with her mouth, regaining her freedom. To avoid fainting from blood loss, she washed her face with clean water, then quickly bandaged her injured arm, picked up the car keys from the table, and drove away without a word. But because she had overdrawn her strength so badly, Jessie's consciousness still gradually blurred. The car finally lost control and crashed into a large tree by the roadside. The violent impact attracted the patrol police. Jessie was finally taken to the hospital and successfully rescued. Her injured right hand slowly recovered, yet this extremely thrilling experience rewrote her life. In the days that followed, she often dreamed of that mysterious man with his eerie features and glowing red eyes, leaving her sleepless through the night. Until a month later, a news report revealed the man's background. It turned out he really existed. He was a tomb robber suffering from an illness. Now he had been sentenced by the court and no longer held the terror of the past. The moment she walked out of the courthouse, the haze cleared and sunlight fell. Jessie finally let go of all the past, completely reconciled with the humble, weak self she once was, and welcomed a brand new life. Alright, that's it for this video. See you next time.